we're going to start with me abusing John.
Isn't that every episode?
It might be.
For long-time listeners, you may be familiar with myself and John, but Aidan is a long-time listener. Is, I guess, one of you. But he's come to join us today.
Yes. Thank you so much for having me on.
One of us.
One of us. One of these is not like the other.
I would have joined you, but I didn't want to spoil the moment.
Yes.
So, Jonathan's otter obviously wants to get involved because, it's not a party without Jonathan's otter getting in my way. So, Aidan, do you want to do a quick sort of I guess, intro or debrief to listeners who you are?
Yeah, sure. So I am a student that is also doing content part-time at Cornell. And I would say my story starts when I was in high school. I remember junior year, COVID came, and suddenly I had so much time, just boatloads. So I looked in the mirror and decided I needed to lose 30 pounds, right? So I went on YouTube, searched up how to lose weight fast. Bad idea, because that led me down the anabolic diet, which is a diet where you eat as high protein and as low calorie as possible. I lost 30 pounds in 3 months, which is way too fast. And I reached this low point in my life where I wasn't curious about school, wasn't confident in my health. And I remember that one day I was walking in the basement when I found this Ali Abdaal YouTube video on building a second brain. And he said something in there that really struck me, which was building a second brain is like playing a game. And I remember that really stood out to me because back then, all I was doing was playing video games, doing bad diets, and not enjoying school. So I decided to make learning to build a second brain, which for people that don't know, it's a marketing term that just means building a system that helps you collect information from your life. And I know these are a lot of terms that I'm about to throw here that might
pause for a sec. I
Yes.
love how you said marketing term because I totally agree. It's a marketing term.
Yeah.
Just want to emphasize that.
Yeah, it is a marketing term, but it's a cool one though. It is a cool one. And yeah, building a second brain essentially just means building a system for helping capture information and then fostering it over time to create things out of and better understand that information. So I turned that into my game. I started creating content online, even in university, and I haven't looked back since. I've fallen back in love with the process of learning itself. I feel like it's the most fun game imaginable.
I guess a little bit of context for John. We actually met at a Building a Second Brain, I don't even know what you call it, a conference, a meetup, a thing in London.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I remember you purely because you asked me about Obsidian, and I think you were using Rome at the time, or you just moved from Rome.
I was, yeah.
And I was like, why are you using Rome? That's what I started thinking about. I'm like, oh, here we go. It's going to be one of those conversations because at the time, Rome cult was a thing. I mean, it still is, but it was a big thing then. But yeah, so that's sort of how we met, how we started our conversations. And you've heard, obviously, John and I discuss apps and tools before. Are you using Obsidian or Notion or Rome?
Yeah. So you'll be happy to hear I've joined the Obsidian cult. I'm kidding. I have joined Obsidian. I did so about 10 months ago at this point. And it was one of the best decisions I've made. I don't want to say the tool is more important than the mindsets or the methods you use, but Obsidian is a magical tool. I have found it to be not only better encrypted than Roam Research. I like that it's on local file storage, but the community is awesome. been nothing but nice people. I joined the Linking Your Thinking workshop with Nick Milo. That was wonderful. And I've also found the actual like customization with the plugins to just be great. So yeah, Obsidian, I love it.
Nice. So let's talk note taking for a sec then. I'm assuming John's got some questions going on and swirling around.
I can see him down there with his like hand on his beard. Now he's taking
it's getting serious.
I'm sipping tea. Yes, it's serious.
The OAP has come to play. Come on.
Oh yes, yeah, I probably am the OAP. Great. Good to know. Good to know I'm the OAP in this room. Thanks. Well, so before Obsidian, what did you use?
I started with Google Drive, and then I moved to Google Keep. Then I moved to Notion. Then I moved to Evernote, and then finally I went to Roam Research, and then finally I went to Obsidian. So I've been around the block with note-taking apps, and that's
the most fascinating journey I've had.
Why would you go from Notion to Evernote?
Yeah, what happened there? To talk about that.
That transition makes no sense.
It doesn't make any sense. No, I think what happened is I saw that's what it was. I was in Notion in junior year of high school, and then I took Building a Second Brain during my senior year, and Tiago uses Evernote. So that pushed me to go over.
As soon as you said took Second Brain, I'm like, oh, Tiago. Oh, yeah, it was him.
Yeah. Well, I'm curious, what was your journey like for both of you?
John just copied me.
I don't know what you did before. Well, I was in Notion first, so that no, you were in first.
I was gonna say I was there before databases.
Oh gosh, that was a dark time.
Yeah, that sucked.
Dark time.
It was good at the time.
The medieval ages.
Well, at the time we were like, oh my, well, I was like, this is amazing. This is like I can move blocks around, and I'm not constricted or anything like that. I can make columns. It was so cool, and sad times.
I think I was in Evernote first, then a little bit of Todoist.
What, for notes?
Not for notes, but for other things. But yeah, Evernote was the one I started in. That's where I built this was back when I was doing guitar teaching and I actually cared enough to actually store notes because I didn't previously. So I was in Evernote. Then I moved to Notion when the databases came along, and I'm like, yeah, this is great. This is exactly how my brain works and how my brain works and how it works. So I like this. Past me did not know what current me knows now. And I stayed in Notion for a very long time because I just liked Notion, and I still like Notion. If I still had a team, if I had multiple people working for me, I would probably still be in Notion. But as it's now just me, I moved very, very, very happily over to Obsidian, and it gave me the thing I loved about Notion was the freedom it gave me, but with some limitations. I always say when I talk to people who are like, oh, why do you use this and this and that? It's like, there's this journey from like the traditional task management apps, which are you do this, tough luck, to ClickUp, which is you have a little bit of freedom, but you're still within this. Then it's Notion, where it's just like, do it how you want to do it, but you still have some little much less boundaries where you build your own boundaries in that. And then you have Obsidian, which is just like, do what you like. And your boundaries are not important. Like your boundaries change one day to the next. It's fine. We can deal with this. We can cope with this. That was the thing I was finding as there was a lot of things happening in my life. I needed way more like just no boundaries in my way, and Notion just kept getting in my way.
It's one of those.
So I saw what Danny was doing with Obsidian. Was like, oh, that's cool. Oh, that's really cool. Oh, I need to use that now. And I was in there, and then that was it. I was sold. Took me a bit of time. I made tons of mistakes and tried to overcomplicate it because I used to treat it like it was like Notion, and I had to set up my structure first, which no. And then I just completely dumped it. And it's really interesting now, particularly for Dungeons and Dragons, which I run, it is all inside of Obsidian. Which is delightful. Oh, it's a dice. I see dice. Oh,
yes, it's not
shiny
focused. Shiny rocks.
Yeah. And that everything for me for Dungeons and Dragons is in Obsidian, and I've just updated my template because I'm testing out incorporating some other systems from other things into my games, and it was just how annoyingly effortless it was. It was just, okay, cool, I've put this extra heading in my template and now it just works, and I don't have to think about it, which is just so nice.
It's for I'll go through mine very quickly. So I'd say very quickly, I was in Word, Microsoft Word, because that's where my writing happened. That's where I did my essays, university essays. I didn't take and never really took notes in class. They weren't a thing. I was always I was even kicked out of a couple of lectures for not taking notes. Like, if you're not going to take this seriously, then get out my lecture hall. So I did, and then I walked into the one that was next door because the lecture wasn't in that one. It was like a split practical. But yeah, and I got kicked out a couple of times, and I was told off, oh, you need to get your pen and paper out to take notes. And I was like, yeah, but I don't take notes. So I never really took traditional notes. I just used Microsoft Word to write my essays. Then I explored Evernote for a day, maybe two, couldn't stand it. That was after a library lecture where they taught us how to do research. I didn't listen to that one. But I was like, oh, there's an app. I'll try that. I didn't like it. Then Notion, 3 years after Notion, Obsidian, and it's been closing in on 3 years now, I think, with Obsidian. I'm like 2.5 years in, something like that. So but yeah, question for you then, Aidan, because I know what John's use for Obsidian is, and I know mine is very research driven, like academically research driven. What's your use for Obsidian?
Yeah, that's a great question. I did want to comment on one thing from both of you, which was, I feel so similar to you with the Notion to Obsidian switch. I feel like Notion is like Duplos. You know what Duplos are, like the big Legos, and then you switch to Obsidian and suddenly you have normal Legos. So there's like so much.
That's a bonsai tree Lego.
Yeah,
that's like you're building the map, the world.
Exactly. Like Duplos is you're building a little structure, and then Legos you can build anything.
Gonna piss off Notion users.
Yeah. So as for your question, there are two main things that I use it for, which are firstly for schoolwork, secondly for content creation, and actually three main things, and then like thirdly, I would say like fleshing for daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly, and yearly review and reflection, which is more personal. It's like kind of goal setting and feelings oriented. I don't usually integrate that into my note taking for content creation. But yeah, is there any of those three in particular that you want to hear more about? Or
John
no?
did some evil hands, so I'm sure he's got a pokey question.
So this is something that I find really fascinating with, I think, the PKM world at large is the obsession with daily, weekly, monthly, yearly reviews. I don't think I have ever done a daily, weekly, monthly, or yearly review. I've tried it, can't stand it, get bored really quickly.
I'm a poke you. If you've tried it, then you've done it. So you can't say you've never done it.
Okay, fine. Committed to it consistently.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Like, And I'm so intrigued what is the why do you do it?
Mhm.
And how does it help you? And because of course we have reflection, which
Mhm.
I don't think I ever stopped doing.
It's a
That is,
practice.
that is a constant practice. Is this a kind of a practice to help you reflect?
Mm.
Like,
Yeah,
why
that
do you
is.
do them?
I'm so glad that you brought this up because nobody's actually challenged me on it yet, which I love. I love this. The
Welcome.
yes,
Yeah.
yeah.
We're just going to say, what's the point to like everything you ever have done?
We're about to discover I've wasted hundreds of hours of my life, and I should. That would
You
be
never
You've
waste
watched this
time.
podcast, right?
yes.
That's literally every week. Well, you haven't wasted, but that's literally every week. We're both like,
Learning experiences.
exactly.
shit. Yeah, that's a true point. I don't know why I do that. Why am I going to do it?
Yeah.
I'm not going to do it anymore. Okay, cool.
Yeah. So to answer your question, I think a story will be really helpful, and that was the story of my second quarter review for this year. So for my secondly quarter review, I every quarter take a really new novel spot and flesh out like 6 hours in the day. I'm like, this is all for journaling. It's going to be special. So this last quarter, I went to Flour and Salt inside of my hometown of Hamilton. It's a very small rural town. Nobody's ever heard of it, but Flour and Salt's like the best bakery there. And I sat there and I told myself, I am not leaving this chair until I have finished this review. So I sit there for 6 hours going through my past journal entries of the last quarter, looking at my calendar, my
Are they like
to-do
everyday
list.
journal entries?
Yes, yeah, everyday journal entries. Literally reading every single one. Not like every single word, but like going over the main points. And then I start to answer these journaling reflection questions, which you've probably heard of some of them, like the Odyssey Plan by Ali Abdaal. Have you ever heard of the Odyssey Plan
Mm-hmm.
or no? Yeah.
I've watched all of his content multiple times.
Yeah. And then also Mike Schmidt's journaling personal retreat questions, which are what should I start doing? What should I keep doing? What should I stop doing? The reason I'm telling you all this is the what should I stop doing is where my like whole world changed when I asked myself that question. Because for the first 4 hours of the review, like I had found some interesting I'd come to some interesting insights for how I could live the next quarter better, like what goals I could have, what activities I clearly enjoyed, what I didn't enjoy. But when I asked that question, it took 4 hours to really get to the point where like all the jargon, not jargon, but all the distractions from everyday normal life had finally like simmered away, and I could really think with clarity. And I realized the main thing that I should stop doing is trying to get straight A's in every one of my classes. In high school, I had been that student that gets straight A's all the time. And I kept that identity into college. So for the most part, that's what I did. I got straight A's in every class. But for that quarterly review, I realized, geez, this is taking a lot of my time, and I'm not necessarily learning more getting the A compared to aiming for a B plus or a B. So it was only to answer your question in totality. I think that's the main reason I do them is they carve out the time that I might not give myself throughout the chaos of everyday life to really let the distractions simmer away and let me see something that I should be doing that I might not if I just went about my day like normal.
I can see John.
Yeah.
why? My instant question is, why do you need to carve out a
6 hours.
why the ritual?
Mhm.
Why the ritual?
I guess to clarify that, or maybe add to that, is like,
Mhm.
obviously you're talking about a quarterly review. Why
Yeah.
do you have to wait to do that?
Yeah, that
Mm.
too.
That's a good
That's kind of
question.
the interesting
Yeah.
thing of like, because if I see something and I'm doing this a lot at the moment because there's been a lot of changes that have been happening for me, and I have just been noticing things, and it's interesting to hear, like, from if I'm understanding what you're saying,
Mhm.
you don't notice them in day-to-day life unless you sit down and like do this ritual.
I guess I should clarify that. That's a great question. I don't only do the reviews if it's like exactly the week or the quarter. Obvious, like there are times where I'm like, oh wow, I should sit down and go through and really evaluate what I'm doing. Like a really good example is the start of the Cornell semester just came about a week and a couple of days ago, and it wasn't during a normal review time, right? It would have just been a weekly review, but I did a much more big journaling and reflection process because I'm like, oh, my life's going to completely change because I'm going from the summer to the school year. Like that's a big shift, and that was where I really sat down and did the review again. But I like the routine of it, even with the spontaneity of sometimes doing a review when it's not a technical review time, because I feel like it's super easy if I don't have the ritual to tell myself, nah, I don't need to do it. Like I know what I know I'm living in a line with my values. And then oftentimes when I still sit down and I do it, I'm like, oh, I did need to do that. My goodness.
The thing that comes to the thing I want to say the most is I don't see, like, when you say quarterly, monthly, weekly, obviously they are constrained by a time. Like every week you will do one, but you've just said that if you feel like you want to do one, then you'll do one.
Mhm.
Or if there's a significant point in time, it's a significant event, then you'll do one, which means you're not constraining it to the week or the month or the quarter. You're doing it when you feel it. And I would imagine when you feel it, yeah, it's the camera. It looks all pretty. I'd imagine when you feel it, you're becoming aware of something to make a reflection. Like there is something happening that makes you go, I need to reflect on this thing. So why would you reflect on something if you don't feel aware that you need to do something about it? It's like me going, now I'm going to reflect on this random thing over there part of my life, even though I know it's exactly the same as it was yesterday. Like, why would I need to review that?
So is what you're saying that the having these regular reviews you think might make you do a reflection when you don't have anything to reflect on, especially if you've just done a lot of reflection outside of the normal review process just because of life?
I would say you're always thinking and considering different decisions and experiences. So when you say, I'm going to review this, if there isn't a purpose for the review, then the review purpose becomes just doing the review rather than having like something outside of the fact that you're doing it, which to me, from my experience anyway, is a waste of time. If I was to sit here and say, I'm going to do a weekly review, it's half an hour that I could spend doing something else, because if something was to come up, I'm not going to sit here and go, oh, I need to add that to my review. No, I'm just going to do it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Man,
that's a similar experience that I've had when trying to do weekly, daily journaling, etc., etc. It was like I'm doing it because I should. Like it's an obligation to do a review because that is what you do. You
Have
do
I
a
ticked
daily
off my
review.
task today?
You've ticked it off your task list. It's like, and it risks, not of course saying you do this, but it risks a lot of like that navel gazing of like, Let's think really deep thoughts about how deeply thinking we are deeply thinking about deep stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
Instead of like living to your values, it's almost like trying to make yourself live to your values. It's like the process of trying to live to your values instead of the action of doing it. That is something that changed for me, because I've been there. I'm going to journal every day. I'm going to do all these things because that will make me X. That will help me do Y. Except it never helped me do X or Y because I was too busy obsessing over the reviewing and like tweaking my template when I was in Notion, was when I was doing it, because that's the popular thing to do in Notion, to have lots of reviews. Like tweaking my template to change things and adapt things, and then I didn't really review anything, and then I got myself caught up in this like trap of, well, I'll put this down to review later in my designated review time, instead of like reviewing in that moment.
Yeah,
because then it will change what I do, and it means, oh, am I in integrity to my behavior? Am I? No. Oops. Okay, quick. Rather than, this is a thing that I think about right now. Let me put it in my journal to review in a week, month, year, 6, etc. time.
Okay. So tell me if this is what you're saying, which is like two things. First is that if you're sitting down doing consistent reviews like this, it might almost turn into thinking procrastination, where you're like, yes, I am thinking very deeply right now, and that is a good use of my thinking deeply time. And then secondly, if you're taking something in your life and saying, nah, I'm not going to figure out what to do with that now, I'm just going to wait till my review, it might like artificially make you not reflect on things and prolong it until the review.
Yes. The caveat I would add to the second point is, when I see people take journal notes or they put things in their journal, the assumption is, or I assume the assumption is, it's in my journal, I will review it, or it's in my journal, therefore I've I've taken notes on the thing, so I will remember it better because I can do flashcards and active recall on it at some point. Stupid things.
Buzz.
Yeah. But then once you've put it down, the GTD, your brain is for having ideas, not storing them, rubbish. It doesn't help, like, because once you've done the journaling bit, all of the stuff you're thinking about will dissipate as time goes on, because we forget things. That's just the way the brain works. It's what happens with thinking. So when it comes to that review point, you'll maybe have a completely different perspective on what the point in the journal was. You may not even know why you put the point down. You may just skim read over a couple of points when at the time you wrote it was really significant. So I guess my question then is, if you're writing things down in your journal, like daily journal, and you don't see it until, say, the Sunday when you do the review, do you still remember vividly or well why you wrote the point down in the first place?
Oh, that's a great question. If I'm being perfectly honest, not all the time, but I think I've gotten better, because the more that you do the process, the more you realize your future self is a dingus, and you need to find a way to explain why you wrote something down in the moment. That being said, sometimes that can take more time than it's worth, instead of just figuring out what to do with the thing right then. I think I do have one thing that I should have been more clear upon with my reviews.
If you disagree, fight back, by the way. If you disagree, just fight back.
Yeah. Also, we are just to set the tone. We will grill you. This is how it works.
Oh no, I love it.
We're poking each other.
Yeah, absolutely. And feel free to poke back with anything any one of us says.
No, I think this is great. Like I love the separation of ideas from the person. Like I don't feel attacked at all.
Good.
We'll try harder then. It's fine.
Try hard. Yeah, you should just punch me through the screen. What I was gonna say is, with the reviews that I do, one of the things that I love about them that I haven't said is I almost use them as a way of like creating a diary of my life. Because like some of the questions that I have in the reviews, actually a large amount of them are like, what were the 3 biggest wins of the week? What was the most enjoyable event? What was the most story-worthy moment of the week? So some of the questions aren't even about like, how should you live better next week, or what should we do next week? It's more just like a diary that allows me to, when I go back through it, see like, oh, that's what I was doing that day, and that's what I was doing on that week, and like, oh, that was the theme of this quarter. And so it's just fun. Like I just like
Oh,
you ever heard of the gap in the gain?
Mhm.
But I just like the feeling of seeing the gain from week to week.
That's
It
fair.
definitely isn't always the most like, not every single week is like, whoa, my brain is expanding, I have become God. No, that doesn't happen.
The brain doesn't expand either, otherwise it's
It doesn't do
inflammation
that.
and it's kind of like dangerous, but yeah.
Exactly. That as well. Yeah. I'm really curious now that we're on this. It sounds like you guys have both tried this in the past and it has not worked. It has not, from what I'm hearing, worked. So I'm curious for why do you feel it hasn't worked for you, and what do you do instead that's different from me?
I would say I have not tried it in the past. I treat this principle, like the whole like review thing, the exact same way I treated active recall when Ali first spoke about it. What was it, like 4 or 5 years ago now? I look at it and go, I don't see the point, because what I do is already part of like natural learning processes. So why do I need to add this buzzword technique / framework thing on top of something that I know already works in my context? Because Ali was obviously talking about medicine and learning in medicine with flashcards. For me, in sports coaching, flashcards are redundant because you can't put a flashcard of how to kick a ball or how to throw a ball or anything like that. That don't work. So when I look at reviews, because I was already engaged in reflective practice, I look at the review and go, what would I do in the day, the week, the month, the year that I don't already do throughout my practice? And getting into like terms here, but when I'm doing a warm-up, I'm reflecting on my practice design, whether it was good or not. Was it effective or not for the warm-up of that session? When I'm in the session, did I develop skills in that session? If I did, it was good. Good. Why was it good? Reflection, etc. Reflection going beyond evaluation. And then the other point, Stephen King talks about this. He talks about the sieve, the idea of a sieve. So he doesn't use a notebook or write down notes for his stories, because he tries to think about them. And if he forgets about something, it will obviously wasn't that good. If he then remembers again, it was good enough. So he treats his thinking process as a sieve. So he doesn't like noting things down until it's somewhat cemented in his idea of making a story. If you're not familiar who Stephen King is, like big movie developer, writer, like you just literally search him on any internet and you'll find him.
There's multiple internets, Danny? On any internet?
Internet searches, as in like browsers you can use. Because if I say Google it, then people are like, oh yeah, I'll Google it. I'm like, no, because I Bing it. But I don't want to say Bing it because people are like, why are you saying Bing it? I'm like, because that's what I would do. I would Bing it.
I would DuckDuckGo it.
No, you wouldn't.
Yeah, I would.
You actually use DuckDuckGo?
I do.
Wait, that's an internet search engine?
Yeah.
I didn't even know
it's
that
used
was
by a lot of
thing.
Obsidian users.
Oh wow.
I knew it was popular, but I didn't realize John used it. I thought he binged it.
No, DuckDuckGo.
Oh, okay, fair.
Purely because it's the default on the browser that I use.
Oh, it's like Arc.
I used Brave for so long, and DuckDuckGo was default for Brave. And then when I switched to Arc, I just imported it in, and then there we go.
I'm on Edge, so Edge and Bing.
So Stephen, so keep going with the Stephen King thing in relation to like journaling.
Well, yeah. So the way he would see it as from an ecological approach, anyway, we're looking at remembering rather than memory. So instead of storing memories, where how do you remember the thing? What's your process for remembering something? And Stephen King, with his Sieve, he's suggesting that because he's thinking about ideas, he's thinking about his stories, he's thinking about all these concepts and narratives that could be implemented into the stories that he's creating. He doesn't want to write them down because then he may feel like objected to, oh, I need to use this thing because I wrote it down. Like it's adding emphasis on something because you've written it down. And he wants it to feel more natural. He says that he finds more emotion and more natural tendencies for a story to feel natural if he's thinking about it. Because like that doesn't feel right. And he can articulate that throughout time, throughout the action, and it sieves through, his words, sieves through all of the bad ideas. But that's the process. Whereas when you write it down, you then go back to it multiple times and it can bias the story. And that's where the sunk cost fallacy obviously gets involved and all the other psychology that you could bring into that. But that's his view. Obviously, there are other writers that do the complete opposite. You look at people like Brandon Sanderson. He has Wikipad and he puts like every idea down in his Wikipad. Then he looks over his Wikipad to create an outline inside of Word, which creates his fucking massive novel stories of like 500,000 words.
Yeah.
So both work, but the way I would see reviews and reflection, because it's on your life, if it wasn't that important, or if it wasn't important enough for you to remember or for you to take notice, then why are you taking notice afterwards? That would be my question.
Okay. So was that the question right there?
That would be the question. Yeah. I just have in general.
Yeah. So. Oh, that I love that. I first off, that Stephen King story. Fact, I did not know that. That's fascinating to me. I also heard he like when he finishes his novels, he puts them in a drawer and doesn't read them for 6 months, and then he comes back. I thought that's very interesting as well.
That's the same principle.
Yeah, same principle.
Because he puts it away, and then when he comes back to it, if he remembers parts of the story, he knows it was a good story because I remember this character, I remember this event, this was significant. If he goes back to it and he's like, I have no idea what's going on here, it wasn't that impactful. There wasn't enough of a reason to remember it.
I think my response to your question is it reminds me of a book that really changed my thinking about human psychology, Stumbling Upon Happiness by Daniel Gilbert. Have you ever heard of it or no?
I've heard of it. I haven't read it. I haven't read a lot of books.
the main three, oh yeah, I remember that. The main three ideas from it are humans' memories of the past are false because we don't remember everything. We take snapshots. We remember the peaks and the ends. Our perceptions of the present are skewed because we all perceive differently based on our backgrounds, our genetics, our socioeconomic status, everything. And also our imaginations of the future are also biased because we project our present selves onto the future. So I know there's a whole bunch of jargon in there, but the point that I want to make as it relates to journaling and why I find the reviews that I do helpful is when I journal in the moment, how an experience made me feel and think, it makes sure I really capture what it actually was inside of the moment. Because when I look back upon it later on, I might think about it differently. So to give you like a really good example, there was a day where I was sitting with my mom and my brother in the dining room. And my mom was like, do you remember that time that you went to your cousin's lake house and had like, what was that like? Like, do you remember how you found it? And I was like, wow, it was the best thing ever. It was like, it was so much fun. I had a great time. She was like, that's interesting because the first time that you told me about it, you said it was not fun. What happened? It turned out I'm such a naturally positive guy. I had skewed the memory by every time I remembered it, I would make it more positive. And the only reason that I knew what was true, what was not true, is I went back into Rome research, went to that day, turns out totally did journal about it. I said it was horrible. And so, yeah, I think that's like one of the reasons that I find the journals really helpful is sometimes they allow me to see what something was really like later on. And then that allows me to say, okay, maybe I shouldn't do that activity anymore because I actually really didn't enjoy it that much. And it also allows me to see the consistencies, like, wow, I haven't enjoyed this activity every time that I've done it. I should not do that anymore. Whereas on a day-to-day time scale, it might be a little bit more skewed. That makes sense?
Yes. Time. It's a funny thing that John may be thinking the same sort of thing I am, but when I hear present, future, past, I hear overlapping events. And when I hear perception, I'm not sure whether we mean the same thing when we say perception. But when I was listening to that, all I could think about was what things in the future are motivating your current actions, and things in the past motivate your current actions. And even though what your interpretation, your perception, your interpretation of past events is now, it's still accurate now.
Yeah.
So even back when you did the thing, you may not have liked it. You may have learned something. Actually, you will have learned something, but you may have learned something significant that's changed your view on what happened in the past. So when you look back at the journal, you think, oh no, that was actually a bad experience. Now, it was a bad experience then, but you're a different person now. Because you're always changing in time. So there being overlapping events, some things that you've developed or learned or understood deeper may have actually changed your experience for, okay, that's actually a better thing than I thought it was originally, or actually it's a worse thing than I thought it was originally. John's poking.
I am. I'm going to poke again.
Yes.
One thing I do keep hearing you say, it sounds like there is an assumption, and I can't think of a better way to put this, that you're always doing something wrong. It's like, oh, I need to look back at this because someone told me it wasn't this, so I need to go back and I need to go and make sure. And I recognize that from my own kind of experience in the past, which is where I started doing the reviews. One of the things is, it's not out yet, so you won't know. I have been writing my philosophy of practice. And one of the things that I noted, and as I'm hearing you talk about your like experience of writing reviews, is how little I've actually been sat down and writing my philosophy of practice. Like, I went into the activity like, okay, I'm going to make my philosophy of practice. I'm going to make it look good. But it was interesting as I keep coming back to it. I'm like, oh, that's a little bit here. That's a little bit there. But it is not a thing that I am like, okay, I'm going to sit down and write it this week and I'm going to do it. And that was my assumption that I made. And I said that to Danny. I said, I'm going to sit down this week. I'm going to write it. And that did not happen. And so there's two ways I can look at that. One, that's because I did it wrong and I wasn't thinking about it and it wasn't a priority for me, so I didn't do it. But then if I sit and actually reflect, I'm like, no, I am doing it because it's changing how I'm behaving and my behavior is adapting because it's even part of it is there. And I'm there going, oh, cool, this is a thing that I'll add when I next get around to it. So it is the kind of process and the action versus the planning. It's kind of like, instead of planning my pop, I'm doing my pop. That's two separate things that jumped out at me, and I guess things I was talking
as an overarching question to bring it to something that may be tangible to answer. How do you look at all of your reviews and summarize all of those reviews into behaviors that you can elicit in the real world? Like, apart from just going, oh yeah, I did all those reviews, I answered all those questions, like how can you look at it and go, this is what's changed from learning just in general? Because I would imagine the whole purpose of a review is to learn something in specific, answer certain questions. So can you look at something and say, this is how I should act because of all of these things that I want to do, i.e. competencies or values, goal-directed behavior, those sorts of things? Like, is there something you have for that with your reviews, or are they just like tons and tons of words everywhere.
No, these are phenomenal questions, by the way. I love this so much. And yeah, to answer your question, the way that I have the reviews organized to make it easier to digest and read is I have summaries of the main takeaways. Well, actually, in a way, each review is a summary of like the week is in a way a summary of the week, and the month is a summary of the month. And obviously, some nuance gets taken away when you scale up, but the process of doing the big reviews, like the quarterly, becomes much easier because when you go back through the monthly review and the weekly reviews, you can see what main takeaways your past self took away. And some of the questions I ask myself, I always ask myself on these, on every weekly, monthly, quarterly, and yearly review is, what did I like about my the three roles of my life this week? And those are health, wealth, and relationships. I think those are like universal. Every single time that you are just going throughout your life, you'll have something to write about those three. And then on a week-to-week basis, I'll write down those. Then on month-to-month, summarize those. And what I often do is I will then on my reviews or between my reviews, if I feel like it's necessary, I'll go to this note I have called a Who Am I note. It's literally called that. And I have there kind of what you're describing, John. You can correct me if this is wrong, but with your philosophy of practice, I have like a note that kind of describes how I want, like, who am I? Like my values, role models that I have in my life and what I've learned from them. I have my 12 favorite questions, which I took from Tiago Forte, and I'll change those.
From Feynman.
Yeah, I took it from Feynman. You're right. And yeah, I'll change those during the reviews or in between sometimes to reflect how I want to come across in the world.
Okay, yeah. Question then. I'm gonna get in there first. Sorry, John. You said health. You said health. What do you mean by health?
That's a good question. There's so much inside of that. Like it could talk about physical health, exercise, sleep, diet, but it also refers to spiritual health. Like, God, these terms could just explode with a whole bunch of different stuff. Spiritual health, like, and in that I count like meditation and mindfulness and like, and then finally, I think it's important to note that it's really hard to separate those because they're all related. Like your diet's going to affect how you think, how you feel.
So why are they separated?
Oh, they're not. It's just under one big thing of health.
So when you do your review of health,
yes,
what do you do? Do you say I was healthy this week? Like what goes in that section?
Yeah, I could literally just pull up and say some of the stuff that is there. Let's go to my last weekly review. And we'll see what's,
while you do that, I do have some delightful questions for you.
Yes,
additional pokey ones. As you were talking about how you are making up these reviews and they are summaries, and you said something that for me made me scream alarm bells, which was, and I can't quote exactly, but you mentioned losing nuance.
Yes.
And like for me, in my practice, nuance is where the juicy parts are.
Mm-hmm.
For me, any practice that removes nuance is detrimental, is inefficient, shall we say?
I like that word.
Because you're removing nuance, which is where everything is. In my view, in my experience, that is where the biggest breakthroughs in like how I operate as this fleshy body on this earth actually
if we assume realism and we actually exist.
if we assume that, of course, yeah, which we will now, because otherwise we'll be here for hours. But like the lacking of nuance is what I find, and I think Danny agrees, is the problem with the whole PKM productivity, organization, all this stuff.
I would just say online space.
On the online space is just lacking nuance. And
understandably so. I'll add that.
And of course, yeah, understandably, because it's easier and it's simpler. And you said something else about how hard it would be if it wasn't like that. And then when I hear that, perhaps a masochist, who knows? I'm like, well, I want it to be hard. I don't want it to be hard, but I have to think. If I'm not actually thinking and like really thinking, not just kind of ticking a box, which again, I'm assuming that's what you're doing, but like lacking that nuance is really like
I'm gonna
to me.
Just gonna call out John as well, because John was kind of in the same boat when he first did the pop. John was like, oh yeah, it's just this, and oh, it's just this. And then I asked some questions. He was like, actually, I don't know, like curiosity. What does it actually mean? And that's something John's troubleshooting.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. Just kind of why I was going to bring it forward, because exactly the same thing of like when I first started to build mine, when I got my values out, I was like, oh, they have to be 3 because that's what Danny has. And it was like, Danny has 3, so I have to have 3. And then I was like, wait a minute, why? Wait a minute, why? What is that assumption that I have made? And is that a valid? Well, no, I can have more. Cool. So let's go do more. And I just threw them all on, and you can actually see them on the Vaultcraft. Yeah. Like all of the stuff that I have. And then it's kind of developed from there. And that's come from the nuance, not from the the reflection on the nuance, not on the process of reviewing and that, and summarizing and making it easier.
Okay. Yeah.
It's like, yeah.
What you said before I answer that reminds me of your podcast with Danny about how you got into academic reading. Whereas before, like you weren't into doing that. And you guys actually also got me into reading more academic literature, because I don't think if you're not in academia, it's not natural. Like it's super easy to just be like, nah, I'm just gonna read blog posts and that's it. Yeah. So to answer your question, that I think is a valid point about the losing of nuance. Like the whole important part about these reviews is that you are thinking hard. Like that's the point. Like, and I can see that if you scale up, you could make the argument, though there is the argument that the nuance is taken away from the daily level. However, when I do the quarterly, the monthly reviews, I actually go through all the journal entries. Like I do the daily, I do the weekly, I do the monthly. So I'm actually technically looking at everything. Now it's interesting to see the differences between,
from a different lens. I'm also thinking nuance from that exact moment, because there's a lot in those moments that, unless you write the biggest of journals, like we're talking essay level journals, like for every single moment that's drawn your attention, which begs the question, how much time do you spend writing journals? If you spend more time writing journals, the journals are great, but then you're spending a lot of time writing the journals instead of like you're living in the journal rather than living.
Living full stop.
Yeah, just living. Boop. And so that's kind of my like.
Yeah, I think that right there is, from everything you guys have said, I think that for me is the strongest argument against the consistent reviews. Is like, why would I wait to do a weekly review if like something happens in the middle of the week and it's like, wow, I got to process this like bad. I think, yeah,
You've
yeah.
said that word. Here we go.
I was just going to say, I think it's just to reconceptualize this potentially a little bit. We're not saying don't do them. It's a reconceptualization of what they are. So the way I see it, and I think John's the same, we see it as reflective practice. We engage in reflective practice. So if there is a moment in time where we need to focus our attention on something specific and dive deep and critically understand why we're acting that way, then we'll do it, rather than the review being, we're going to do a weekly review or a daily review or a journal documented sort of constrained time limits. We remove those limits and we do consistently review, reflect, but it's when we find it appropriate rather than a scheduled time. I think that's the conceptualization that we're looking at.
That changes everything. This entire time.
Oh, welcome.
This entire time, I thought we were talking about like solely doing your reflective time during these constrained blocks. And in that case, I was like, no, don't do that. That sounds horrible. No, I don't even do that. When I said like daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly, yearly reviews, sometimes when I do the reviews, I'm not doing any reflecting. It's more just to see like, this is what happened. This is a diary of what happened.
Why?
I find it fun. I find it really enjoyable to see like, oh, this is what I got done this month. This is like, when I go back, it's like being a personal historian. I'm like, oh, that's what I did during this month.
To what end? Like that's kind of like, I'm just like, okay, cool, but why?
I think it's fun. I think it's awesome to be like, wow, this is how much like I set this goal to do this long ago, and look how far I've come in that goal. Or like, wow, now when I'm like 5 years from now, I might be like, what was I doing in junior year of college? And then I can go back and I can see that's what I was doing. That's awesome. I just think it's an incredibly fun process.
How long have you been doing these reviews?
Well, I was doing them in Rome too, so probably 2 years at this point.
Okay, have you ever gone back to your thing from 2 years ago recently?
All the time. Yeah, very, very often. Like actually one time I was talking with my parents when we saw each other a few days ago, and we were talking about going to snowboard and ski at Whiteface, which is a ritual we had for like 8 years before COVID. And it reminded me of the last time that we went before COVID. So I went into my review from the time that we were in there, and it was really fun getting to like get brought back into that moment. I had written about a conversation we had, and then I reminded them and they remembered. It was great.
But you'd already remembered.
No, I didn't remember the like full conversation that we'd had. I just remembered that we'd had like
Could you not have without that? Do you think?
I probably could have, but you know how like the specific cue for the memory.
Sorry,
like, yeah.
But see, this is the thing that I've been poked at so darn much, my honor. But it's really changed my relationship with it.
Yeah,
like just the whole there must be something there. Cue. Yeah, Danny can play with that one in a minute, but I'm gonna like. It's that there was already a cue. Why does it what would have happened if you could have reflected in your head assumptions, tons of them, but like if the default thing is to go back to your notes or your reflections,
Reviews.
which you have
Reviews, not reflections.
Reviews, because they're not reflections as I would define them.
That overlaps, yeah. Different meanings.
Yeah. But which do not have the nuance which you have said, what is missing from that you may, if you internally do it's that bias that Danny was just talking about, as you'll bias yourself to what you've remembered in that journal entry that you've put, versus something else that happened that actually had a profound effect on, like, if that's not in there, does that mean you're not going to remember it? I don't know. Like, because then you're biasing yourself to what's written in that journal, which puts a heck of a lot of pressure on you to journal flipping everything. Assume that nuance is really important, which to me, it is really important. And one of the things that I struggled with my journaling is, one, I just didn't have the time to get everything because I like nuance. I'm a little bit obsessed with nuance. And
that's what experience is.
Yeah, exactly. Experiences is a bunch of nuances. And so for me, it was more of a practice of actually doing it, like thinking. Not saying, of course, that you're not thinking, but like the practice of thinking and experiencing or re-experiencing that versus having something put down on paper. Everything that's gone down on my pop as philosophy of practice, like, it does have stuff to do with me, but it also doesn't have stuff to do with me, if that makes sense. It is very much just, it's action.
I think something that may be not necessarily conflicting, but getting in the way potentially is interpretations. Because John and I are both speaking through ecological terms, and we're viewing the world through verbs rather than nouns. You're saying review, and a review is a thing that you do. It's like a done process. But when you refer back to a review, it's a memory, it's a store. It's something that happened, like full stop happened. Yes, you can say it happened, great. But the process of remembering continues. So reflection is all the way through. So when you say, I'm going to do my weekly review, I would ask, when are you not doing your weekly review for that week? Because if you're remembering things from that week, surely you're still reviewing in that week.
Couldn't you say that if someone did say they're going to do their weekly review, they're referring specifically to like the process of sitting down and going through whatever is entailed in their weekly review process? It doesn't necessarily mean that they're not reviewing the week when they're not doing it.
Yes, but the way I would see that is, you're saying my review session is one time where I look at certain events at this point in time through like these last 7 days. But the next day, when you remember things from that week, that's also a weekly review because you're still thinking about things from that week. So why did you need to write things down on the Sunday? Why don't you write them down on the Monday? Well, you could write them down on the Monday, but that's not for the daily journal review or whatever you want to name it. So if you're remembering things constantly, because that's how we experience the world, we remember things in the past. And I would argue, depending on the terminology, you can remember things from the future because that is what hallucinations are. That's what predictions, different terms, but that's what predictions are when you're thinking about the future and motivation. So are you remembering something like 3 months ago? Does that count as a review? Traditionally, no. So I guess my question to you is, what do you mean when you say review? What does it mean to you? Because I think it means something different to us.
Yeah, I think when I say it, it means purely the time where you sit down, where I sit down, I go through whatever is entailed in my weekly, whatever process I'm doing, and I go through my notes in Obsidian, my journal entries, and I do it. And then outside of that, I just call the process of like remembering just the verb, like reflecting. Like I'm reflecting on the last week, which I can do even outside of these reviews. Like I think that's what we got. I realized an epiphany, what you were saying a bit earlier, is I don't mean I'm only reflecting during these reviews. That's happening all the time. There's been many times where I've sat down in the middle of the week and said, okay, I got to think through this decision. Let me do that. And it's not like I have to it's not like I have to pull up the weekly review process and be like, I'm going to go through it now. Like, no, I don't have to wait till the weekly review to do it. The review to me, I don't always like reflect and think how I'm going to live differently next week. I just enjoy doing them to collect like, these were the 3 biggest wins. And yeah, I personally like going back through and seeing what I was doing during the time. But to go back to what John said with the nuance, that was one thing I wanted to actually poke you on a bit. Is it sounds like what your problem is with the consistent reviews and having to go back to a note to remember what you were doing is you feel like it pulls away some of the nuance. And it also it means you're not trying to remember the event as it is now. You're going back to see what your past self wrote about it instead of trying to come up with you can probably remember the event on your own just by like thinking about it for a bit with whoever you're with. So I think the thing I want to poke you on is, do you think that there's also some nuance lost if you try and remember a memory as you remember it in the moment instead of going back to a note and seeing what you actually wrote when it happened? Because I think humans are deeply self-deceptive creatures. That's, as you guys marked upon, I tend to look for the things that are wrong inside of the reviews because I am of the belief we are deeply self-deceptive. And I think that if you're only relying on your memory of things instead of going back and seeing what you wrote in the moment, you might also lose some nuance.
Before John answers, I'm just going to clarify something. When you say memory of things, are you talking about something that you remember without context, or are you talking about something that you're remembering through various contextual experiences? Because remembering something, being told to sit down in a room and recall something is very different from re-experiencing something. So could you clarify that?
Oh, can you word that in a different way?
So when you say memory, are you referring to sitting down and remembering something without any cues, to use a term that you'll be familiar with, or are you referring to someone deliberately going in and experiencing something that's familiar to that potential memory that they're trying to recall?
I think in the context that I just said it, when I said remembering, I meant trying to come up with it without any contextual cues.
No, I understand. I don't do that.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't do that. That's I don't go, okay, I'm going to sit and think about last week when I spoke to X person and I did this and I want to remember. It is very much as I experience things, it's like, oh yeah, I remember. Good example. My kids are with my mum at the moment, and she sent me a photo of them of my kids playing on Dawlish Warren, and that kind of triggered, if we're to use that word, like that experience of me being with that, and I had a reaction to that, and that caused me to reflect, I suppose. It's like, what's happening here? What's going on? Like for me, I was feeling feelings about feelings. What are those? Why? And that was where my reflective practice came in because of that. I don't sit down and go, right, I'm going to think about my memory of XYZ last month and last year. It's
pull out that book.
Yeah, grab that book, put it in, open it up, let's go. It is very much I am incredibly undeliberate about it. I am deliberate in not being deliberate, if that makes
no,
sense.
that makes total sense.
Beautiful oxymoron. Because that I find allows me to be more true, more real in that, and I have the nuance that I need from that experience.
Yeah.
I think that's kind of the
It aligns very well with the Civ example.
yes, yeah. And that like entropy, using the words, like there are things that have entropied away, but there are still relevant pieces of that. Like, oh, yeah, this makes me feel like this. So, okay, what do I want to do? What action do I want to take? I feel a bit unhappy with the way that my mum mentioned her reply of like they're making memories. Did I just assume she said this? Did I just assume that? Did I just assume this? And it allows me to have that reflective practice in the moment versus having to sit down and reflect as a it feels like a teacher telling the way that I see like the practice of like, right, you must sit down and you must reflect and write 100 words on XYZ experience. And that overtly deliberate because it's what you're supposed to do versus, well, I'm always doing it. And if I'm always doing it, why do I need to sit down and do it? Is kind of my like I could write journals and part of me talk about my experiences and the things I've done with my kids or things I've done with my other half. But to what end is always my question. It's like I'm doing it because I should, or I'm doing it because I want to. But if I want to, why do I want to? Like, where is that going to take me? Versus just being in integrity and living in integrity, because obviously we can't always live in integrity. We will very much make mistakes, and it's that what's it you called it? It's
self-deception.
Yeah, you have that self-deception, but I don't think I like that. For me, that self-deception of like I am purposely like it to me, my assumption that I get from that is that I am deceiving myself. It's like, am I deceiving myself? That assumes there is a wrong and a right. It's very binary. To me, it's I found the word that Danny used with mine because one of the words that came up was self-mastery, and I squirmed as heck. And during our conversations, Danny can take over in a minute as well. It moved from self-mastery to self-orientation. I am always orientating myself to my commitment to myself, to integrity. And so that's kind of like that. Yeah, I lost my train of thought.
Yeah. Lots of words.
Yeah, lots of words.
Danny, did you want to say something about that? Because I had two thoughts from
Go for
John.
it. I've always got something to say.
So I loved the first thing that you said about reflecting in the moment, like as the experiences come up. I want to reiterate if I'm like around my family, or even if I'm alone and I have something that I remember because of something that's happening in the moment, I don't say, oh, okay, let me go to the nearest coffee shop, let me get out my computer and let me write it out. No, there's a lot of times where I'm just like in the moment, like feeling it and reflecting, as you might say, and I'm not gonna like sit down and write. The reason I mentioned that one memory with my mom and my dad is because we were just interested in specifically what had I said in that journal entry of the lake house, because of the fact that I was remembering it differently than how they were remembering. And then the second, yes,
I didn't mean to interrupt. So do you think that the way you were remembering it was wrong?
No, I don't think the way I'm remembering it was wrong. I think it was different.
Because the way you said, like, self-deception, like it sounded like you thought you were deceiving yourself from that lake house example, and that thing corrected you in that way. So what I'm hearing is that your journal corrects you.
No, I should clarify that. It's not always the journal corrects me. Because as you said, like you change, and that might have changed how you're remembering the thing. And you are remembering it differently than how you experienced it in the moment because you're a different person. I think the reason I use the term self-deception is not to mean that the journal is always the objective truth, but rather that it can sometimes help me see areas that I think an example will make this more clear. Like an example where the journal helped me realize somewhere I think I was being self-deceptive, and that is partying at Cornell. I used to think that I should do partying because a lot of people do partying at Cornell. So the first time that I came to Cornell, I walked into one of the frat parties there and instantly was like, oh God, this is not me. Like flashing lights everywhere, tons of people I didn't know. I walked up to the first person that I saw. I was like, hello, my name's Aiden. What's your name? They said, Pete. I was like, great. What's your major? Pete was archaeology. What's your major? I'm like, psychology. That was the conversation. I saw the guy 5 minutes later. I'm like, hi, Pete. And he's like, hi, what's your name? And I was like, that's how I knew partying was not for me. So I wrote this in my journal. And then a few weeks later, I went to another party. Also hated it. Wrote it in my journal again. Cut to a year later, and I want to party again because I'm like, maybe I'm a changed person. Maybe I'll like it this time. So I go again. Hate it. Write it down in my journal. Another 6 months goes by. I do it again. Hate it. Write it in my journal. I'm starting to see a consistency here. So now I am reflecting upon the fact that every time that I have wanted to go partying again, I just have not liked it. And that doesn't mean I won't one day like partying, right? I might change so much that I like it, but I do think it's important to note that every time I've gone, my self in the past has said, this sucks.
So I have experienced exactly the same as you. So I stopped going the first time it sucked.
Mm-hmm.
This is pokey, apologies. Sounds like you don't believe your own experiences or trust your own actual experiences. It's like, oh, I've gone to this, hated it, but I'm going to go do it again. My interpretation of that is you do not trust your own experiences. You have to keep experiencing it. And your journal is almost an evidence book to you. And I don't think that's all it is, to clarify, but it's an evidence book of okay, so this is a pattern that I'm noticing that I hated. So now I can trust it versus this sucked. I am never doing this again. And allowing yourself, it sounds to me like you're trying to find permission to do the things you want to do. You want to have evidence to do that versus just going, yeah, no, I hate this. I'm not going to do it.
Oh, no, that was actually, I think that was the opposite of what I was trying to get across is I wasn't partying again just to be able to say, oh, I've journaled and hated this 4 times, therefore I have the right.
No, that's not quite what I mean. Why did you so okay, let me backtrack and ask another question.
Yeah.
Why did you do it again?
Oh, that's because I changed as a person. I took Charisma University, which is a course about how to become more charismatic. So I was like, oh, okay, maybe I'll enjoy going to a party more because I know what to do in the social setting a little bit better.
Pause for a second. Did you go back to your journal entry to see if you had liked it or disliked it the first time?
When to decide if I would go partying again?
Yeah. So the second time, did you think before you went to the second party, did you go, I've been to a party before, I'm going to check my journal entry to see what I experienced? Or did you just remember you not liking the last experience?
think I just remembered me not liking the last experience because it was
Like-
pretty salient.
That's what I'm thinking.
Yeah.
So my question is, why journal about it then? I'm
Because
just curious.
Because I think that as we've figured out, like when you change, you remember something differently. So I like to see what did I truly feel in the moment that it was happening.
But sorry, I do not wish to interrupt again. Actually, I do, because this is really fascinating. But like, you went and took a course, and I'm calling myself out here because I've done it too, and I've done it a lot. Like,
Speaking from
because you
experience.
felt that there was something wrong. It goes back to that idea that you're doing something wrong, which is what I meant about evidence of like you're trying to prove it to yourself that you've tried it because you are different now. Maybe you will behave differently.
Mhm.
Where am I? Yeah, like why? And also going on what Danny just said, like you knew it sucked.
Mhm.
So why have the journal? If you knew that experience sucked, why do you and big massive experiences like that, you will never forget.
Mm.
You certainly
So-
didn't use a journal just to remember all those 4 experiences.
Yeah, you didn't look at your journal to remember those. You just remembered them.
You just remember
because
them.
You
Yeah.
are in this environment where we are discussing this, and so that causes a cue. Okay, that which is you can touch on if you really want to. And also to clarify, to be perfectly clear, I do
Yes.
not think your journaling is wrong.
Mhm.
I do not believe what you're doing is incorrect or wrong or shouldn't be done. I am intrigued at the actions behind what you're doing, like what behaviors versus whether it is right or wrong. Will I ever journal? No. I can't see myself journaling because it's all in my head.
Depends how you define journaling.
Well, yes, journaling in the way that is defined in this
Traditional
context
sense.
right now.
Yes. Yeah.
I cannot see myself doing a weekly review, written, sit down, reviewing, teacher, sit down, think about this now. It is very much like I am always the time thing of like daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly, yearly. That feels redundant to me because
Overlapping events.
because they all merge together. They are just one big long event that links together, and all of these experiences. As I am talking to you, I am thinking about all of the experiences of the previous podcast episodes, the conversations that I've had with my coaching clients, with my consult, like all of that is there.
Yeah.
And it will never be written in a review. Reviews, sit down, process, thinking, etc. It is very much like why is my question. What behaviors, apart from the act of reviewing, as in the word I'm using here, reviewing is sit down, write your review, think about that. If you already, as you have expressed, do that without that, why do you do that?
Yeah, I think you have a good point. That did make sense. The question at the end there. I think with something as big as partying, like that experience was so negative, I don't need the journal to realize that. But I still, like Danny asked, I did go back just because I was intrigued what I had written down the first time. I think where it is most helpful is for the stuff that's a little bit less obvious, like extreme negative or positive. So a good example that I'm thinking of is my first friendships back at my first semester at Cornell. I did not have good social skills back then, so I kind of latched on to the first people that I met, even though they didn't resonate with me as people. And most of the time when I hung out with one of them or a whole group of them, there were definitely some positive experiences, but some of the ones were not that nice either. I remember there was
Can you
one.
remember those experiences? Sorry, I keep interrupting.
Yes, yeah, I do remember those experiences.
Are you looking at your review?
Not like all the time, like not anymore. What I was gonna
right
say
now,
no, no.
But you're remembering it.
Yes.
So,
mm-hmm.
what I hear you say is that it helps you to look at these smaller experiences, these smaller, less emotionally charged experiences, is kind of what I understood from what you're saying.
Mm-hmm.
But you just remember
you're doing that right now without
mm-hmm.
looking at your review. So I kind of come back to that. I'm sorry, I'm drilling you. I'm not sorry, because it's actually really helpful. And you know what this podcast is all about.
Oh, I love it.
So why?
I think when I was coming to the decision of whether I should find new friends, that was where the process of going through and seeing all of these experiences that I'd written down. And I know you're going to say, like, I don't trust my own memories. But I do.
I wasn't going to say that. What I was going to say was I'm reiterating what I said before. You're looking for evidence to make your decisions.
You'd already made the decision that
you'd already made the decision, because otherwise you wouldn't have sat down to think about it. You'd already, it's to in my experience, and I think Danny agrees, you'd already made that decision.
You'd said
evidence
something
to support that.
Yeah, you'd said something along the lines of, I don't like the friends I have, or I don't know if I like the friends I have. I need to think about this more. And the process of thinking, you went back to your journal because you either didn't trust or you weren't sure about what you were remembering from your experiences.
Well, I wanted to see if I was actually did not enjoy the experiences that I had with them, or if I was just really hungry and I was really angry for some reason in the present, and that was skewing how I saw my memories from before. I'm sure we've all had times where we've had a really bad day and we've been like, I don't like this person. I hate that person. And then we make a rash decision because in the moment we're very angry, very emotional. So I think this process grounds me in that it makes me have to look. Yes. Yeah.
So what I'm hearing you say is you need this review to ground you. Without it, you are ungrounded. Is that correct? Because that doesn't sound like what you're saying.
Doesn't sound accurate, yeah.
No, I wouldn't say my life would fall apart without the reviews. I find them to be helpful tag-alongs. I wouldn't delve into chaos without them.
Oh, I think you should delve into chaos. Chaos is way more fun.
Yeah.
This is a point that I think will step us back a little bit, actually quite a few bits from the...
That'll be good, sorry.
Obviously, we've been talking about journaling. And at the end of the day, journaling is writing. And at the end of the day, writing encompasses note-taking and anything that we do in the written word and text-based editors. So even though we've been talking about a daily journal, a daily review, etc., I assume you treat your files, your notes, your work, your writing in the same way. If not, I would be very curious as to why. So when you're reviewing your notes, whether there be a weekly review of your notes, monthly review of your notes, or your research, how does that differ? And what does the work look like in those situations when you're looking at the writing that you do compared to the writing that you do for your review? Because to me, it's just writing to sort of step out of the personal journaling towards the notes. So you're talking about studying and stuff like that.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that the differences between the daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly, and yearly reviews is there's often a lot more feelings that I embed into the notes, and it's also a lot more like what happened during the day that I want to write about. Whereas in the notes that I write for my content and also for school, it's a lot more about ideas. If I was taking a psychology class and I was doing a lecture, it's not like while I'm writing a note for my lecture, I start talking about the feelings that I'm getting of like in that moment in the lecture hall sitting there, unless I think it's like maybe I was really bored or something, and I think that would be fun. Why?
Yes.
Why not?
Yes, that.
I mean,
Like, this lecture's really boring. Why is it really boring? This guy at the front is talking in a monotonous tone. I don't learn well like this. Yeah.
Nuance.
Why not?
That's the spicy bit. The emotions, the feelings. Yeah. That's where, because I remember you, Danny, went through this process yourself. Everything was really like note-takey. And then you started putting emotions into it. And that feeling of like, well, what's going on here?
Instead of collecting the dots, I was trying to connect the dots to my actual behaviors, my feelings, my psychology. I was thinking with the ideas and with the notes rather than just writing down text, because text, oh yeah, I'll remember that, it's stored. No. Which is, I was like, why don't you include those elements inside of your study notes or research notes, whatever you term them?
Well, I'm not saying I don't include them at all, but probably more feeling-based stuff in the daily notes. And I think I don't have a good answer for you. I think from what you're saying, I should include more feeling-based stuff in the notes in the lecture, because
no, should
exactly.
Be very careful with that word.
Be careful.
We're only asking. We have no ulterior motive.
Nope.
We are just curious on your process. We don't care if you come away and ignore us completely. In fact, we would love that. I'd love to know why.
The rationale,
the rationale and the reasoning behind that. We don't care what you do in the nicest possible way.
Like, you do you.
You do you. The reason why we ask is because it's interesting to understand, like, or the why of why, the rationale of like, cool, this is interesting. Oh no, nice. Interesting. Oh, that's really cool. And that's different.
Like one example
should not do a thing.
Yeah. One example might be, I don't take notes about emotional feelings or how I felt in the lecture because it doesn't help me in the way that I move forwards in the next lesson. But then I would then question you, okay, if you're going to act in the same way every single lesson, even though you're feeling frustrated, surely you should do something about it. And then if you say, oh yes, I should do something about it, well, that is reflective practice in action. You going, actually, this lecture sucks. Why does this lecture suck? Because this person's talking rubbish, or I disagree with them. What can I do about that? How can I change my behavior to enjoy this lecture more, or get something out of it? Or maybe I just don't turn up. Then if they ask me, why didn't you turn up? You can say, I don't like this, I disagree with that. Now you're moving and changing behaviors within the lesson notes and like, John?
So with let's get meta now. You said maybe you should do that. Okay. Why? Is it because Danny and I said so? What is it about that? Like, why should you do that?
Well, I think one of the things that makes ideas fascinating, especially when writing about them as a content creator, is feelings, because humans don't relate to just ideas, they relate to feelings. That's what connects us to each other. So if I included more feelings inside of my notes in lecture and my notes on readings, it would make it easier to write about feelings related to ideas inside of my content. So that's one reason that might argue you could include feelings inside of the notes you take.
How do you identify feelings? Like when you look at words on a page, how do you identify feelings? Because you said you're about writing them, like ideas don't have emotions and feelings, or I would argue if you look at words written years and years and years ago, those words have emotions and feelings connected to them, because the relationship between me, the organism, the environment, the information in the environment, affordances, creates a relationship of feeling, of emotion, energy in motion. So text does have emotion in it because it's within the relationship of an organism consuming it or perceiving it and the actual thing existing in the world. So how would you identify a feeling or emotion in something without the explicit word happy, sad?
Yeah. I honestly don't know. Like,
that's a good answer.
Yeah, I have. I was about to respond with, I feel like you'd have to feel. I feel like you have to feel for it. Yeah, I don't think. Nope. Do you have any idea how you would?
I know how I do it, but how I do it is
Yeah.
going to be different for each environment, because the relationship between me and the medium, the environment, the context, everything involved in that will change how I feel. So I can't give an answer because there are multiple answers, dynamic or systems. But that to me would be an important question that I would then go and reflect on and ask myself, and that would be part of my POP. That would be part of the characteristics and the components of health that I follow. Okay, one of the areas of my philosophy of practice is I want to challenge people intellectually. Well, if I'm going to do that, I need to understand feelings, emotions behind words. And then that goes into my lexicon, which we discussed like almost 2 hours ago now, about the meanings behind words. And when we look at those things combined together, my behavior needs to mimic all the other values that I hold true to me, honesty, integrity, those sorts of things, and answering that question relating to my practice, reflective practice. And if you don't have an answer, good, try and figure it out. I have loads of questions I don't have answers to. They're not my 12 favorite questions or whatever you want to map it to. I don't have a number. I don't have a limit.
Get 10,000.
Yeah.
Infinite.
It's just part of my reflective practice as I behave throughout the world and as my philosophy changes throughout the events that I engage myself in. Hopefully that makes sense. No, it's not an answer, but
yeah, no, that did. I yeah, thank you for explaining that. I think we should try and come up with some like summary of the conversation as a whole, because I do have to go soon. But this has been wonderful.
We can round up the conversation. We can't summarize it.
Round up. Yeah, is there some concluding questions that? No, I'm not gonna say concluding either. Round up questions that you still have, and I'll think about anything that I can come up with as well.
I don't think there's going to be any questions that we have that will be relevant to the context when people are listening, because that takes it out of the context of the conversation, and we wouldn't be able to follow up and explore, because then you have started an event that wouldn't be able to finish in the same time period that people are listening to. So to me, it doesn't make sense to add a question at the end unless you're looking for a conversation, which for us will happen in the comment section or in Discord. But for you, that may be disjointed.
Yeah, very disjointed.
That makes sense.
Do you have any?
Ooh. I guess I would love to ask, how have you both developed this ability to talk to each other on the podcast without getting like super angry in a way that I have not seen so many other people able to do? Like, this has been wonderful. I've loved this. just diving into questioning.
And like, have you also partly hated it?
I've partly hated it, partly loved it.
Good.
You know, yes. Yeah. So I'm curious, like, how has this evolved over time?
I'm going to credit it. Obviously, it's got to do with me, but also got to do with John. And it's Yeah, of course, it's all John. But it's the relationship that we've built through psychological safety, and it's being open enough with one another to be vulnerable. I've said this a few different times on the podcast. A lot of the research that I've come from is about creating coachable environments using the constraints-led approach to coaching. And in order to do that and to have useful, fostering conversations, you need to be vulnerable as the coach and say, I don't know. But you also need to be open enough to say, actually, I'm going to challenge you on that because I think something different. Not, oh, my brain says this, or other people say that, or evidence suggests this. No, I think this right now. What do you think? We disagree. Why do we disagree? What do I think that's different from what you think? And where did that come from? And because we're both inquisitive people and we're both curious, we've also both spoken a lot and challenged each other a lot. We can poke. We know. I don't want to say we know each other's limits because I don't think we have limits, but
No.
But we know what this environment is psychologically safe, and it doesn't matter what people online say. But I think people listening appreciate the honesty that we have to these conversations, discussing potentially taboo or piercing questions.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that. I wish more people were able to talk with that feeling of psychological safety, because this conversation has gone so much more deep than I think we could have gone if we weren't willing to tread on those areas. So I think that's one of the reasons I love listening to the podcast so much. I'm sure a lot of other people like listening is because between two podcast hosts, I've not seen such such like in-depth into each other's processes and stuff.
I think what works as well is both of us, like when you see the eggshells, both of us are quite happy just to like stamp on the eggshells. It's like, nah.
I'll apologize if I stamp on them, but I will stamp on them.
Yeah. I think this comes from the approach that we both take now. Previously, I've always taken the ecological approach when we started these conversations anyway, and John has moved towards that approach. And because the approach removes the labels, the categories, the binaries, the right and wrong, because it removes those from the conversation, therefore there is no, oh, I am this or you are that. It's we are individuals experiencing the world in different ways because we're all divergent by design with varying learning experiences. So how can we change our behaviors to match the relationship we have with the environment we're in to move us forwards? That's what the ecological approach gave to me. I think that's what it gave to John.
It was very much moving away from that. It was very much moving away from that binary, because the binary was the thing that caught me for so long. Of that, there is a right and wrong way to communicate. There is a this, there is a that.
And to be clear, at the start of this, I would say John more than me was much more caged in conversations because of some of the labels that he had. I don't want to speak for John, but I feel
I am cautious. I test the waters first before all of the questions. I go to all of the questions, but before I do that, I pause for a minute just to test the waters to see, because some people do not want to do this, and if people don't want to do that, I did not want to put that upon them. So that's why I'm like, okay, I'm going to ask one little pokey question. And then I'm just going to go straight to the heart of the fact that, like, because
I'm a little further down the line. I'm much more blunt. I'm just straight to the point, which backfires. I say backfires. It doesn't backfire at all. It does the intended point on social media. Some people don't like it. They react in different ways because everyone's going to come up with a reaction to challenge, because no one likes challenge. I don't like being challenged, but I like the process afterwards. Like the initial poke, I'm like, no, I don't like this. But just because you don't like it doesn't mean it's a bad thing. And recognizing that, I think, is a skill people need to develop. It's not taught in schools. It's something I wish it was taught in schools, but it's not. And most adults don't have that either. There are so many adults around in workplaces where you poke them on something and they become defensive. Why are you defensive? I'm not attacking you. I'm not challenging you. I might even be challenging myself by asking you the question. I might be saying, I'm incompetent at this thing. Why are you doing that? But because they heard the question, not my assumption about myself, they might think that I think they're incompetent and saying, oh, why are you doing that? No.
A good evidence of that was actually this conversation around, oh, maybe I should do that. Hence why I was like, no, you should not.
Yeah.
Want to. And if
Isn't
you should,
that,
why?
Isn't that interesting? Like, it's so normal to think that way that I immediately assumed that it was like a you should do that instead of a maybe I'm like, tell me, why do you do that? And interest of seeing if you would want to do something similar. Yeah. Well, thank you both for having me on. This is this your first guest or no?
No, we had Julia and Jeff on from writing the book.
Okay. Yeah.
So I guess
Awesome.
second guest?
Yes. Second guest.
Third person,
Yeah.
second guest episode.
Yes. There we go. Yeah. Thank you so much for having me on. And I hope you both have a great rest of your day. We should continue the conversation through where would be the best place to reach you guys? Through Twitter, Discord. We're on Discord.
I have a server and John is a moderator in the server, and every time we post, or every time content is posted, it's in there. So plenty of threads and conversations. I can send you a link to the server.
That would be phenomenal. I would love that. Yeah.
Right. I think that's it for today. So go on, John, say it.